Hello, everybody, and welcome to week 3. We're so happy to have you guys back with us as we go through chapter 5, 6, and 7. All right, so you guys know the drill. We're going to go ahead and have our wonderful chat moderators and co hosts introduce themselves. And as you guys introduce yourselves, you can tell them a little bit about your work. Are you a newbie? Are you a vet? Are you yet to go into the industry? Let us know where you're from as well. All right, we're going to start with Linda. Body and welcome to week. All right, Linda, we can't hear you. So you may want to close out the LinkedIn window for a second and then go back to it. Technical difficulties, everyone.
Move on.
All right. I think, Linda, I think we got you now.
Working on it. Sorry.
That's okay. We're going to go to Lauren and then we'll get right back to you. Go ahead, Lauren.
All right. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, cool. Hey everyone, I'm Lauren. I'm a learning experience designer. I'm here in Oregon, in Corvallis, Oregon. And I would say I'm exiting newbie and entering something in between, especially over the past 2 years. I started off in education just as an ESL instructor. I taught in Turkey for 10 years, almost 10 years. And I just, wanted to get behind more of the learning experience design. I was kind of tired of being a teacher, and I'm pretty sure a lot of people have felt this, where you feel like your hands are tied behind your back and you've got to go into a classroom and teach things that you don't really believe in. And I was like, nope, no more. I'm going to get behind the stage and start coordinating things and making things more learner centered. So that's where I am today. I'm also trying to explore things like VR and game-based learning. So yeah, that's why I'm here. So I'm reading the book, and good to be here with everyone.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Kaniqua?
Hello, I'm Kaniqua Abdul Malik, and I'm calling today from Maryland where it is snowing, even though we were coatless at the beginning of this week. So, and in terms of my experience, I've been working in the learning space for the past 6 years or so in international development. So I started off doing e-learning primarily. And now I'm doing a lot more consulting people on their learning designs, helping. We have a lot of people who do training in our organization. So helping them improve their training, helping them transition from face-to-face training to virtual instructor-led training. So that is what I have been up to.
Awesome. So good to have you here. Now we have Aaron.
Morning, everyone, or afternoon or evening. I think we're all coming in from different places, so it's really nice to be here. I'm calling in from Vancouver, Canada. We had a little bit of snow yesterday and also started the month with t-shirts. So, March always marching like a lion, out like a lamb. I've been in the learning space for probably 25 years. I taught also in the classroom. I taught ESL overseas, so it's similar to Lauren, and left 10 years ago for similar reasons. And I kind of got into, I love designing courses. I love the curriculum piece. And so I got into online learning, and I've done LMS implementation, administration, course development, webinars. Like, I've done all of it. Now I'm really excited about learning experience design. So again, similar to Lauren, I took a human-centered service design course from IDEO last year, and it's like, I was like, that's what I want to do. And so I'm doing it now, and it's really awesome and challenging. And so I feel both like a veteran and a newbie all the time. So that's why I'm here, because there's always so much to learn, and what an amazing community. So nice to meet everyone.
Awesome. All right. Now we're going to go to Dr. Cropper.
Hello, I'm Dr. Max Cropper. I'm in eastern Utah, and we have snow in the mountains and had a little bit of snow in the valleys. It's been cold, mostly cold, but I have a master's and doctorate in instructional design, and have worked with Dr. M. David Merrill, who's one of the top instructional design theorists in the world. And so I'm always, and I teach workshops on how to create 5-star courses, and also performance improvement and leadership workshops. But I'm trying to determine how to marry instructional design theory and practices with learning theory, which is what Julie Dirkson's talking about. So that's very interesting to me.
Thank you so much, Dr. Cropper. And now we're moving on to our amazing chat moderators. If you've been here with us before, you know that this book club wouldn't be half of what it was without our chat moderators really engaging everyone. So we're going to go back to Linda.
Hey, tech issues resolved, I think. Sorry about that earlier. So I'm Linda. I live in Northern Virginia, but am visiting Kansas City this weekend. So it's 11 o'clock for me and not 12 o'clock. I homeschooled my kids for close to 20 years and have just in the past 3 years started learning about instructional design and working on my master's in learning design and technology at George Mason University. I currently have a graduate research assistant position there on a team helping to create a new minor in ethics and artificial intelligence. And I also do, some freelance and contract work at the moment, which may become a full-time position when the GRA position finishes, creating courses, and I am particularly helping customize some courses in diversity, equity, and inclusion for customers of a company.
Thank you so much for sharing, and no need to apologize for the tech issues. What you guys don't know is that our chat moderators have 15 things open that help them do everything. So they are wizards, all right? And now Sarah.
Hello. Hello, I'm Sarah. I'm from Burlington, North Carolina. Like Lauren and Aaron, and I think Linda, maybe. I have a ESL background. So sometimes I do ESL tutoring, and then also I'm a doctoral student in an applied linguistics program at Temple University. So I'm looking in, I'm a relatively newbie at instructional design, and I'm interested in learning more.
Awesome. So great to have you. And my name is Nicole A. Harris. I'm the Learning Solutions Enthusiast, and I love learning solutions of all kinds. And I came from the K through 12 space, also came from advertising and branding space as well. And honestly, I know that we meet every week, but my heart bursts in gratitude every week because these people didn't know me from Adam and decided, all of you all in the chat as well, decided to come alongside us and really create something really special here. And we have a very special surprise for you. Well, a surprise announcement that you guys will see shortly. So I'm actually a newbie, and I created this so that I could learn. You may notice that during these, I do a lot more listening than speaking because I am learning from everybody. So if you're in the chat and you're a veteran and you've been like doing this, please add your expertise. We need it. But if you're also a newbie, please don't feel like you're reticent and you're like, oh, I can't say anything. That's why our co-host panel and our chat moderators are so diverse so that this community can grow. All right. So now our chat moderators are going to head off of this platform. They're going to go to LinkedIn where they can just be present with you guys. And we're going to go ahead and start our conversation on chapters 5, 6, and 7. All right. So as you guys know, it is week 3. So this week we have 3 chapters. So rather than going into the audience takeover where you guys ask questions, we're going to kind of skip that this week so that we can have time for each chapter, because as you all know, it goes fast. I want to give some rules of engagement because I heard that we had a couple of new people joining us. So no one has had any issues with any of these, but it's always good to say these things out loud. So being open to the ideas of others, engaging respectfully and professionally, open to just new ideas in general, listen and give everybody a chance to contribute, and pay attention to the moderators because they have some really good things for you guys. And those hashtags help us all to kind of see what ideas you all had when I go back later and I check. So hashtag come read with me and LinkedIn Live are the ones we're going to use today. All right. So without further ado, chapter 5. All right. So chapter 5 was all about, well, a lot more than just this, but in general, it was a lot about attention, right? As you can see with our graphic here, there's all kinds of things they're supposed to be listening to, like the explanation of the key concept, but then there's the hum from the AC unit, or wait, this interesting anecdote, a clever summary. Whoa, there's a weird picture, right? That happens to all of us, right? Even when we're super interested in a topic. So we really want to start chapter 5, our discussion, with how do we grab attention? So one of the things I wanted to ask the panelists today and you all in the chat, attention is important, right? But when I was reading it, I started to think attention is not just important because it's a good learning practice. Like you have to get the attention of your learners. But honestly, in response to our current societal environment, right? Just culturally, we live in a situation now and a circumstance where there's social media, there's devices, there's videos that are 2 minutes, there's an excess of information. You can get access to good and bad information. And learners now need different things just mentally, right, to process their information. So the panelists, you can respond to any one or a combination of any. And you guys in the chat chime in as well. So I'm interested in knowing what from chapter 5 speaks to where we are in a society and the new needs of learners. How does this show up specifically in your work? Again, we have people here who are not yet in the industry, or people like me who are in the industry, but I'm looking to see what other possibilities I'll have down the road. So let us know the different types of things in your work. How do we engage in micro learning, right, without sacrificing deep learning? And how do we use strategies in chapter 5 when trainings must be longer than when we would like, right? So we have no choice but to have a long training, but how do we still include attention? So those questions are going to be up there the whole time. And guys, this is a book club. So I want to encourage my panelists, if you need to physically thumb through your book and say, hey, hold on till I find my thing, this is not a show, okay? So it's okay. I think in the last couple of weeks, we've all tried to be very, it's like, okay, I have notes, I have big pieces of paper, so feel free. All right. Does anybody want to take a stab at any of these questions?
I'll take one. So from the instructional design perspective and the theory in Merrill's First Principles of Instruction, he says you achieve engagement by teaching with real-world tasks, meaningful real-world tasks, scenarios, problems, and what happens is your motivation and your engagement skyrocket when people really care about the significant real-world tasks. And so, yet all of the elements in the chapter also, still apply, but the way you achieve those, is these real tasks, the real world stories, the real world situations that are challenging.
Yeah, I totally agree. A lot of times we're creating learning experiences that exist in a vacuum, and that doesn't help the learner at all. So I totally agree with that, Dr. Cropper. Does anybody else want to take a stab at any one of these questions about attention?
I'm gonna follow Dr. Cropper's response there, because I was thinking about two things. One, engagement, which is something I've been thinking a lot about in the last few years. It was in my title, like director of product engagement. So I thought, what does engagement actually mean? And I spent a lot of time in that space, and it's I could boil it down to saying it's providing means I can level up, I can do something, and meaning. Which is really coming from connections. And so when Dr. Cropper is talking about real world experience, you connect with the content of what you're learning when you're actually doing that real world piece. And this is from the classroom days, but I had a classroom that was really rowdy because they were really smart and they didn't want to be in the classroom anymore. And so I sent them, and this was ESL, but they were in Canada. So they were all international students. And so I sent them all to different neighborhoods. in town with a list of observations, like read from context. And they went from a rowdy class that was really hard to manage to the most riveting presentations I've ever seen, because they had to go out there and touch the real world. And it was such an aha moment in my teaching. And so now when I'm working in training, I'm trying to bring real life examples as close as possible. And I think that Julie Dirksen talks about that, is like, if you can't, how to get, I might be flipping through, I've got my notes over here. You can move the point of learning closer to the point of use, or you can move the point of use closer to the point of learning. I'm just looking at my notes on the other screen. So I think that those are really important. Like, how do we get the learner to the real life example as close as possible? So just going off to Dr. Cropper there.
I really love that example. And before I reply to that, everybody who's here, your time is special, and we really love that the community is here. But I have to shout out, and please forgive me if I mispronounce your name. I will always want to honor names, so give me a phonetic spelling in the chat if I don't get it completely right. I think it's Malidia. All right, but Malidia is here from Indonesia, guys. It is midnight. Okay. It is midnight in Indonesia. All right. So I just want to shout you out because, man, I so appreciate having you here with us. But I just want to go back to what you said. I love that example of when you had them go out into the neighborhood, right? And then their behavior changed. Because essentially, even with adult learners, we want behavior change, right? And that elephant versus rider example. So if you guys maybe didn't see that deeply, but the elephant and rider example is that the rider of the elephant has control, right? That's your rational thoughts. I should eat a salad instead of another piece of cake kind of thing. And then the elephant, though the rider can control the elephant, there are sometimes the elephant being animalistic is going to do its own thing. And I want shiny things. I want things that are now. And that's the balance that we have to strike, right? If we talk too much to the elephant that wants the shiny things and the fun things, they may not get the information. But if we talk too much to the rider, when the elephant is taking over, they're not paying attention to that. And I love that you brought up a K through 12 example. And here's why. Of course, we know former teachers are not the only people that come to instructional design. We know that, right? Instructional design is actually beautiful because people come from so many other places. My boss comes from theater, but I do want to speak a little bit to K through 12 teachers, because it is true that K through 12 teachers have a responsibility to upskill, right? Don't assume that you know everything about instructional design, to read literature, to be a part of things like this, to practice, to all of those things. But I think sometimes K through 12 teachers, because there's such a mass exodus right now, there can be sort of this like, oh, what do these teachers know, right? And I think K through 12 teachers really need to have confidence that we've already created these sort of scenarios and applied a lot of these concepts for those of us who are teachers. It's just a matter of naming it, right? So I think about that experience you gave them. When you translate that to adult learners, if they have to learn to use a new software or to implement a new procedure at their job, how can we, instead of saying in the text, you're going to learn to blah, 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 this procedure is important because, why aren't we simulating those environments, right? Why isn't our slide mimicking the look and the feel of what's going to happen at their job? Why aren't there touch points where they can say, like, you would press this button in your actual job, press this on the actual screen? Like, why is it that sometimes we have that, resistance to really creating the environment that they're going to be in? Like, even sometimes we know these things, we still have it in our head, like, no, but I just have to give a chunk of information instead. And it's like, well, information is necessary sometimes, but that simulation is information as well. I think we have a misnomer in our heads of what counts as information. Does anybody else want to take a stab at anything on for the chapter 5 discussion? Any of the questions or a different angle? Anything you're thinking?
I'll quickly say it seems like from the chat and even our discussion that the elephant and the rider really resonated with a lot of people. And I see that Tanya even said that her rider has 2 elephants to control. And to your point, Nicole, that we're in this world where we know, like, there's going to be distractions. There's going to be, if you compare it to when people would show up face to face, you can drift off and sort of not really pay attention. But socially, it was unacceptable to like be on your phone the whole time you're in a class. But now, particularly with the live instructor led, I can be here in one window and have like 50 other windows open. So one of the things that I've been trying to do is sort of like take a minute in the beginning to like speak to the elephant and try to do a brain dump. Like, we know you're busy. We know there's so many things pulling at your attention. I want you to just like quickly write down all the many things that could be keeping you from attending to this. Put it down on your paper so that you know it's captured. Now flip your paper over and I want you to put your key, I call them KPIs, but your key personal indicators, like what you want to get out of this. So I think to do that right up front so that you're getting that intrinsic motivation instead of like the rules are you should pay attention. Like, no, I'm going to recognize that you're probably not going to pay attention, ask you to capture those things, and then I want you to write down the reasons why you should pay attention so that I can draw on that. So that's one of the things I've been playing with, just because we know, even ourselves as design, when we're taking learning, we pull out our phones and things like that. So to recognize that adults have those elephants and try to help tame them in the beginning, I think is one of the things I'm experimenting with.
I really love that. And going back to kind of one of the other chapters where it talks about we really want people to feel like they're smart, and their environment a lot of the times can be hindrances to learning. And though you're talking about I mean, honestly, it goes with another chapter. Like, I'm making so many connections. Metacognition, right? You're aware that you're distracted. You're making space for people to say they're distracted. And in my workplace, I work in a very supportive place, but I could imagine, I don't know, but I can imagine there may be some resistance if I said, hey, in this online trade, not even in instructor led, I'm going to probably say on the first slide, hey, there may be some distractions or whatever, that I'm going to be very like candid about that. Because for some reason we're like, but we don't want people to like know that this is potentially boring, or we don't want people to know that. But it's like, that's part of respecting the adult learner as well, I think, right? That's part of saying, and I think that's a good engagement. Like, okay, they are acknowledging that my time is being spent here. Because I think so many times these trainings, so that's an environmental factor, right? That can be a barrier. So, and then that opens up for the actual learning and the actual content that they need. So I think that that's really, really crucial. Any other thoughts on this part before we move on? All right.
I was just going to say really quick, everyone said everything, but I was going to say also too, like, building off what Konik was saying, like, just maybe giving them the idea that they have an elephant. That visual for me, because after I read that chapter, I was like, this is the elephant right now in me doing this. This is the elephant. Like, I don't know if anyone felt like that, but I kept after it. I was like, oh no, me picking up my phone right now, elephant. That can totally get your own, metaphor. But I feel like having something like that would really help with the metacognition. And then also real quick too, like, I love to engage, not just by getting, learners to think about, cognition, but also to ask their own questions. And that can help with what Dr. Cropper and Aaron were saying, because once they identify what they're interested in investigating and learning, it can help to create those realistic situations, or it can bring into, storytelling into learning experience. I just had to get those out there.
No, please. What you said was so valuable. So everyone, just so no one will feel ashamed. I have this. Go ahead, Dr. Cropper. So I'm looking at this as well. Go ahead, Dr. Cropper.
Well, and like what Lauren was saying, and even Aaron and Kaniqua, and you too, Nicole, ultimately the learner has to own the learning. I mean, who's going to benefit from the learning, right? And so they should be asking questions. They should be thinking about how they're going to apply the learning, on the job and in the real world, or in their own teaching, whatever. And so ultimately, our government has made the states responsible, the schools responsible for the learning. But
Should be the other way.
And it should, and it's hard. I mean, there are reasons for that, but it should, ultimately the learners are going to benefit from the learning, and so they should own it, and of course their parents and colleagues anyway. But that's a paradigm that needs, we need to help shift.
Dr. Cropper, like, all right, like that is so important. When I was looking through my ridiculous note paper, I was looking for where Julie Dirksen says, when you want to tell your learners something, have them tell you instead. Going right to what you said, Lauren, have them ask the questions. And a lot of times it's more valuable to them when they're asking the questions, that is so crucial. Any other thoughts?
I would just say one thing. When Dr. Cropper was talking, it just made me think you can lead an elephant to water, right? So I feel like mushing those two things together is like ultimately, particularly with adults. And one of the things we want is autonomy, right? We want to be able to be choiceful in our learning and own it. And I think that that's really important.
I love that. I love that so much. And again, when you think about it, what our role is as instructional designers, we're not just responsible for this particular course at this time. We can be a part of the shift in what that paradigm shift, right? That who owns the learning, who owns it. Guys, we have a special guest here. You might be like, what? I saw everyone I saw before. Linda, I'm gonna embarrass Linda. Linda's never gonna work with me again. Linda's a chat moderator who I think is brilliant. And I've always been like, get on camera, get on camera. And Linda's on camera, y'all. So let's do one of these in the chat. Let's type clap or something. All right. All right, Linda, if you're embarrassed enough, go ahead. And then I think Erin had your hand up as well.
Yeah, just real quick. My reading chapter 5 is almost like living out everything she's talking about in chapter 5. A little bit of background, as I mentioned, I used to homeschool my kids, and I never sought to recreate a classroom at home, but to create an environment and provide resources and structure and accountability that fostered deep learning and character development. My biggest inspiration was 19th century educator and writer Charlotte Mason, that Julie Dirksen mentions in her Engaging the Learner section. I shrieked when I read that. Julie Dirksen has heard of Charlotte Mason. Nobody outside homeschooling has heard of Charlotte Mason, but it's in this book. So immediately there was something that connected what I was reading to something I was already deeply passionate about. So we're connected there. My elephant is engaged because the elephant's already engaged there. The boost of confidence, because I already know that I know a lot of stuff about the example that she's given. So if I know that, then I can connect with what she's teaching, what she's explaining further. So I know the mention of Charlotte Mason in there was not to promote her philosophy of education, but her philosophies do line up beautifully with everything I'm learning about adult learning theory. So that was just a fantastic, very fun experience in reading chapter 5 for me this week.
Thank you for sharing that, Linda. And the reason why I love that you shared that is one, it's literally modeling, right, to our community right now, because essentially us as designers or future designers, or not all of us are instructional designers. I have to always remember that some of us are organizational leadership development people, all of those, anybody in the L&D space, right? But we often don't get a chance to receive as much training as we would like. You're right. Dr. Cropper has a great program, but like we usually don't have these opportunities, which is why I think people are really into this book club. And somebody said earlier, if instructional designers appreciate their own elephants, and let me put that up on the screen, all right, from Sophia. If instructional designers appreciate their own elephants and treat them well, It's easier for them to understand their learner's elephants and prepare material that catches attention. Sometimes we don't let our own elephants enjoy. And I just hearing you walk through that, um, I was just like, ding, 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 that makes so much sense. And the secondary, maybe as equally important, is that this ideology from the 19th century still holds true. It's not about all these new tricks. It's not about all these, it's the fundamentals, right? That we have to just hone and do well. That was awesome, Linda. Feel free to stay if you want to, but I know you're moderating. All right. Thank you so much, Linda. All right, Aaron.
Yeah, I just kind of wanted to take into that idea of like asking questions. And before I left the classroom, I taught in a university program that was ESL, but the focus of it was dialogic and real world examples. So we were never allowed to use any ESL books. We had to use real life examples, which is why I got my students to go out into the neighborhood. I was like, that's about as real life as it gets. Go and look. You know what I mean? But we started a lot of our classes with just a dialogue. Oh, okay, so today we're going to talk about this thing. What does that look like? What do you know about that? And to me, that seems to be, sort of standard teaching. But when I see this and I see it, in a book and represented, it's about bringing that learner forward. And one of the things that I love about Julie Dirkson's book, and this may be somewhere else, but it's the first time for me, is the concept of shelves, right? And putting things on shelves in the memory. And that was such an aha for me. And when we're asking these questions, we're getting our learners to open their shelves, right? And to create space on their shelves. We're like, okay, there's the shelf, and there's a shelf, and there's a shelf. And now they're ready to receive more information. And I think that that's so, now they're primed to receive the lesson or the information or the knowledge that we're going to work with, and excited to, the presentation of a problem to learn around gives them that sort of like keenness to lean in. It's just like, oh, I want to solve this. So the solving of a problem, I think, is really important. So ask the questions, present the problem, and then go. and then that's how I think you get engagement.
Absolutely. I have to confess something. So when I first became an instructional designer, I knew that unlike teaching, no one was going to know what it is. And that's another conversation for another time that I do have planned, but we'll get there. And I was just like, oh, how do I tell people over and over again that has been used to me teaching in bite size? So I used to just say, oh, I'm sorry, community. I don't really feel like this in my heart. I used to say, oh, those boring trainings you take at work? People make those. I make them. And people be like, oh, okay, I know what you do. And it wasn't because that's the kind of life I wanted to live. I was just like, that's the only way people are going to connect to like what I do now. Like they don't understand learning experience design and all those things. And I don't say that anymore. I've worked on my elevator pitch. But the first thing I'm thinking about in this conversation, right? I'm thinking about all of the ways that we just accept that that's what it's going to be. And I'm thinking about even compliance training, right? You're talking about, your sexual harassment or your public records or, those kind of things. We expect them to be boring. And even as designers, we expect to design them in a boring way that doesn't matter. So then what does that say about that particular piece of compliance if we ourselves have that? And it's just like, we just got to get them out the way. We have to do them ourselves as designers who know better. And we're just like, whatever. And what are we telling people about privacy if we just like shoo it away? What are we telling people about harassment in the workplace? Like, it's so much deeper than that. And I'm saying that as I'm being very convicted, like, dang, Nicole, like you did use the word understand. And what Julie just told you, but you needed that project to be done, Nicole. So you use that instruction that like doesn't really connect. But I'm calling myself out here as well, for sure.
Can I take something on that just really quickly, Nicole? Because I described my job to someone else the other day, but I added an extra one. So I'd like you to also add this. You know that boring training you have to do at work? I make it better.
Ah, yes. I snap when I agree. I love it. You know what?
So,
yes. All right, Dr. Crawford.
So I did a video podcast once with Clint Clarkson. He's a training guru. And towards the end of the podcast, he says, compliance training, you can't make it interesting. And I didn't get to follow up with him. And it was like, actually, if you want, what you can do is come up with scenarios, common problems, and serious scenarios, serious violations of compliance, and address those, and it can become very compelling. And so, almost any instruction, you can come up with scenarios that make it um, much better.
Absolutely.
I saw something in the news lately, and I can't remember what company it was, but someone got like fined or in trouble because they, upon doing research, they realized that people were just clicking through their compliance training, like just letting the videos run, and nobody was actually doing it. And therefore, like the company was like being fined or something like that, or getting in trouble from the government. And, I think Dr. Cropper is right in that, like, I've been seeing a lot more conversations in just the instructional design community about if it's just to like check the box so that people understand or have heard this thing, that's different from fundamentally wanting people to act differently in the workplace around these things, right? So to just say we have a gender harassment policy, now box checked versus, giving scenarios, how would you, act in this situation? Now you're moving from that knowledge to like skill and practice. But generally, like that's not our mandate. It's just we want people to say that, it's a compliance, the box was checked. But I think seeing that pushback from government to say like, okay, everybody did it, but nobody really did it, may start to move that needle.
Yeah.
Yeah. Perfect. Any other last thoughts?
Yeah, I was going to say something you mentioned about like context, like if you don't provide the context to the need for something or direct their attention to that, I mean, you're going to be like, what? Why am I learning? Like I had a Title IX, training, and I was like, how does it relate to what I do here at this institution? And, helping me to see that should have been the goal of that training.
Absolutely. All right, guys. That was phenomenal. We have 2 more chapters. Oh my gosh. This is great. All right. So I don't know if I'm just going to keep it real with you guys. I don't remember if this is the next slide or not, but I'm going to still say it anyhow. I have a surprise for you guys. It should be revealed in the next slide, but I don't really remember what's in the next slide. So let's see if the surprise comes. I'm going to do a drum roll for something that may not actually happen. Drum roll, drum roll. Oh, it's slow. Yay, it happened. All right. So I wanted to announce to all of you guys, week 6, that's April 2nd, author Julie Dirksen will be with us. Okay. So that week, we only have 1 chapter to read. So we're going to spend only a little bit of time on chapter 12, but the rest of it is going to be interview, best practices, everything with Julie Dirksen, everyone. So, that will be, you want to just stay connected to my LinkedIn because that's going to be posted. I don't want to create, I'm just going to give you guys a technical spiel that I never usually give you. I don't want to create that event too early because it may cause confusion for week 4 and week 5. So it will be available. You'll be available to sign up for that after our week 5 book club. All right. So just wanted to put that out there. You guys heard it here first. I was waiting. I've been bursting. I've been wanting to. I said, let me just post it and whatever. But I said, no, I'm going to save it for the community that has been here from the beginning. All right. So Julie Dirksen will be with us. We'll still have co-hosts. We'll still have chat moderators. But Julie has graciously appreciated this community. She's working on her next book. And so she'll probably talk about that a little bit as well. So yay! So I just wanted to share that with you guys before we go to chapter 6. All right. So chapter 6 talked a lot about, we've kind of already touched on this a bit, but metacognition, right? That idea of thinking about your thinking. So recognizing your elephants or saying, hey, do I actually understand this? Or I do understand it. How did I get here? Was it by taking notes? Was it by highlighting it? Was it by going back? what helped me? Was it the visuals that helped me? Like really understanding what your thinking is. So many times we're just processing things and we don't actually have a methodology. We're never taught a methodology to really think about it. So why is metacognition important? To think about your own thinking or give our learners opportunities to do so. How does metacognition, if it does, show up in your work? Or how would you like it to show up in your future work? And how can L&D professionals apply this more? And then number two, I really struggled with how we were going to discuss chapter 6. And some of you guys left some really great comments there saying that you feel like the book club is getting better every week. And that's really because of feedback from you all. So thank you all. But I'm going to be honest, I really struggled with chapter 6 because she gave such great design feedback. I really love that it came from kind of theory to here's how you design. Here's how you design. So I was like, I'm not going to put all of that on the screen, but I'm going to really rely on my co-host and you all in the chat to really kind of draw out those things from the book. So feel free to flip. But what does it mean to design for knowledge? How do you design for knowledge? What does this mean? All right. And I love this quote from Professor Donald Sari, who said, I want them to feel like they invented calculus. At the end of it, he wants them to be so invested and to know so much about this. He wants them to feel like they invented calculus. So my co-host, go ahead and chime in any one of those questions or any of your thoughts for chapter 6. Wait time is okay. We're all learners. So if there's a 30 seconds of silence, 10 seconds, we're not upset with it.
I would say really quickly, this isn't even an answer to the question, but it's a shout out to those people coming from K to 12, because I think did I say that right? Coming from K-12. I think that they really have a lot to teach us about metacognition, because I think that they have to make it so visible, right? Like they're teaching the like text to text, text to world, text, that they're used to teaching strategies to students to help them think about their thinking. And I don't know the KWL charts and all those other things. And I don't think that we do as much. So I think that this is like a really good place where K-12 folks can shine, because we're so immersed in like getting people to children to think about and process their thoughts.
I'm gonna add to that and say, the project that I'm working on right now is corporate training, and they have a new model of business. And I'm really approaching this as learning is the new working. Like they think like you train and then you get on the job, and they're two separate things. And I'm like, no. They're the same thing, but one just continues into the other. And the reason that I want to, and I found this really inspiring, and I'm going to bring into my training program, is in these 3 questions, like, what do I know? What do I not know? What am I not sure of? Like, I really circled around that for a long time. And I think that's really important, because with this group, people, like, the knowledge is one thing, but they have to be able to use it to critically assess cases and get deeper into that later on. And so if they're using that metacognition of like, what do I not know? Then we're teaching the learners in the time to deal with lack of knowledge on the job later on. And that is key, because I interviewed a bunch of the specialists who are on the job. And they're like, I spent the first 3 months of my job banging my head against my computer because they didn't know what to do, and they didn't know what to do when they didn't know what to do. And I want to train them what to do when they don't know what to do. And that is using metacognition to have problem-solving skills later on. So that's why I found this super inspiring.
I was going to say too, like, oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
That just responding to what Aaron said, I think the reason too why they don't know what they don't know is because there isn't space given to have those moments where they can just, now let's pause and think about what do you know? What do you want to learn? How are you going to get there? It's always like information, build skills. We forget those pauses, or what she talks about too, like having this learning flow where there's like, it goes up and then it goes down. And at those kind of valleys is where we need to give them a time to assess and evaluate themselves. which also connects to the feedback that we talk about in the next chapter too. Like, they have to give themselves their own feedback as well. And I think when you make those pauses for metacognition reflection, that's a form of feedback as well.
And one of the things that I think in the last chapter we talked about ideas for engagement and have learners learn real world tasks, real world scenarios, do real world role plays, solve real world problems. And in my experience is when you're teaching for knowledge, the important question is, what do they need to be able to do with that knowledge? What are the real world tasks? What are the real world scenarios? What are the real world challenges, situations? And then what happens is they learn how to perform these tasks. They have to learn how to perform them intelligently. They have to have the knowledge. But we talked about the analogy of the shelves. Well, I use the analogy of the skeleton, and that is the task. The basic task is the skeleton, and then the knowledge and the information and the skills that go along with that. Add the flesh and the body to the skeleton, and the knowledge is built, upon that skeleton of the task.
I really enjoy that analogy. And you guys, both Lauren and Aaron, you guys made me think of something. Um, and basically, what you guys, I'm sorry, everything is shifting on the screen. And there we go, technology. All right. So I immediately thought about ILTs, instructor led courses, versus OLTs, the online self paced. And I think about, you know, if we're going to really aim for metacognition, that typical formula of the quiz at the end of the module can't work. You know, is that saying I don't believe in throwing away the baby with the bathwater? So is that saying never quiz again? Like, no, sometimes that sort of recall is necessary and helpful. But I just can't live on its own as we allow it to, or as it's sometimes asked of us to. And I think, yes, sometimes we'll get pushback from stakeholders, but we're the experts, right? And sometimes stakeholders have just never seen it another way. So sometimes it's not just, oh, I have an idea. Like, sometimes it doesn't work for them. Like, prototype it first, right? Show them the possibilities. You may still get pushback, but sometimes it's like, oh, wait, that I like that better, actually. I had a situation this week. That wasn't a situation. That's so dramatic. I had a conversation with a SME this week for a class that I was helping to revamp, and she was like, oh, we need a recap slide. This doesn't have a recap slide. So she kind of gave me what she thought of as as the recap slide, and I immediately thought of Julie Dirksen, and I was like, no, you want to empower the learner. I didn't have the power to be like, here's your mission. I didn't have the power. It was not one of those type of courses. But I was like, we can empower the learner. Instead of saying summary, right, we can literally say, here's the knowledge that you've gained as a result of this course, and then my subtitle is, here's what you can do now. And everything was just actionable. And she was like, I love it. She just hadn't seen anything else, right? And so metacognition, if you're with the quizzes, you're telling them what they apparently know or don't know. But with asking questions, like you were talking about, Lauren and Aaron and Dr. Cropper, like, no, like they get to actually say, oh, I don't know this. One of the things Julie talked about is a barrier is not only just not knowing, it's thinking you already know. And that's when people dismiss the training. Why do I have to take this? And then if you actually frame it correctly, they're like, wait, I thought I knew this, but I don't actually know this. And I think that that's something that's really important. One of our book club members is an audience. I don't know. I'm awkward, everyone. Willette says, one thing I appreciated about the chapter is creating engagement by inserting immediacy in engagement. If we think creatively, we can make the most mundane, boring training engaging when you create scenarios and there was more, but technology. But I think we understand what Willette was trying to say. But I thought that was really important to kind of point out. Any other thoughts about this?
I do have something sort of in line with the metacognition and some of the things that I've been doing in the virtual instructor-led training. I know every platform is different, so people have different tools, but the platform that we use most often at work is Teams, and Teams does have a GIF keyboard. And I think just throughout, it's nice to be able to do check-ins with people, like, how are you feeling? And I think, again, K-12 has that sort of like red, green, yellow, like I could teach it to someone, I'm totally confused, I'm, at pace. And that's having people check in with where they are. One of my favorite things to do, though, is like post a GIF in the chat that represents how confident you feel about this. And in my head, I've decided that they should be called self-efficacy snapshots. Um, and I think that that's where you're like having people check in on their metacognition, but also injecting some of that fun and humor that like pulls that elephant back in. So that's just one of the things that I like to do on Teams. But I know, again, different platforms don't always let you do that.
But I love it. And you guys heard it here first. Okay. You guys can borrow it, but I need you to, say who you got it from. You heard it here first. Self-efficacy snapshots. But even if it's not a gift or whatever, like different platforms, you're giving people a chance to one, have fun, right? And to also, you're getting very real time feedback. I had a philosophical sort of thought, and I want us that we are staying a little bit extra, everyone. So if you're worried, like we didn't get to chapter 7, and maybe that's my favorite one, we're doing a little extra time today. But one of the things I thought when I was reading the book, I got really incensed or passionate. I was like, wait, I was like, people are so against like the new, the fun, and all of these things. We're never saying to diminish the learning. All of us as designers wouldn't feel good if they didn't walk away with good learning. But I say sometimes we get so bogged down and, oh, that's out of the box, or that's too fun, or that's whatever. And I'm like, it's your responsibility, employer, to like give these people these experiences. In fact, I see it as a benefit, just like healthcare, just like appropriate compensation. When we think about the future of work and flexibility, for some jobs, that's the training is the only time you get to have a break, is the only time you get to be with colleagues. It's the only time you get to have an opportunity for some potential fun. And what is the big gripe? And this was more philosophical than like strategy, but I was like, no, we must have it. We must have simulations. We must have scenarios, because I really think that you are saying to your workers, your employees, that, hey, I want you to be confident on this job. And if it means a little fun, if it means collaboration, if it means that instead of only one module, we only have an hour for this, you get extra practice, and we're going to break this up into 3 weeks. Like, you deserve, it helps our bottom line, right? But you deserve to feel confident on your job. You deserve to have experiences on your job where you can go home and say to your husband or your wife or your kids or your friends, we did this cool training today, and I had to simulate this thing and had to read a script. Like, so for me, it just got way bigger, and I get off my soapbox. But I was like, this is a thing we must do. So I'll get off my soapbox now. Any other thoughts?
So I like what you're saying, and I think giving the learner an opportunity to perform the real task, and you can do a pre-test and find out what they can already do, and then give them the opportunity to perform, and then they've performed. They not only have confidence, they've shown they can do the task, or do the scenario, whatever. And I think the focus on performance is so critical, because if they can perform in the classroom, they should, if it's the right performance, they should be able to perform back on the job and in the real world.
Absolutely. Absolutely. We have somebody asking, Kaniko, did you see it?
Oh, I did. Someone asked about what I meant by self-efficacy snapshots, and that's why I sort of came up with that, because I think it speaks to, I think we also have to recognize that the people who are asking us to create learning, they're much more the writers, so they don't care about the elephants. So if you have the elephant, you need to be able to justify why this was a good instructional strategy. There's a really good book called Humor Seriously, and there's other research about like why humor actually benefits you and fun benefits you in the workplace. And I think as much as we can speak to their writers about why we're doing the fun things, it gives us a little bit more leeway. But to sum up the self-efficacy snapshot, it's basically asking people to put a GIF in the chat that represents how confident or comfortable they feel with the material that you were presenting or working on.
Thank you for clarifying that. And Dr. Cropper, how would you say, what you just said before Kanika clarified, how would you say that you can apply that, what you just said? Like, what are some examples of how that can be applied? I thought that was really good, what you just said too.
Well, if they don't have confidence and they're still able to perform, their confidence goes way up. But it's important to provide coaching as people perform so that they can have intelligent, successful performance. And then their confidence goes way up because they say, oh, I can do it in this situation. And then you give them different scenarios, progressions of problems. And so their confidence, whether or not I mean, they demonstrate their confidence through doing it, through performing.
Absolutely. Oh, this is so good. All right, we're going to move forward. Okay. So we're gonna probably do this one a little sooner, but I thought this idea was interesting, right? And I also feel like we kind of touched it a bit. What place does friction have in learning, right? So those counter examples, not giving too much guidance, enough detail, but not too much, having some social interactions, maybe having to solve problems together. What place does it? I saw Aaron give me the thumbs up, so I'm gonna give it to you, Aaron.
Yeah, this is something I'm trying to convince the client right now. So this is a really good conversation. It's timely. So I really want them to bring in like bad examples of cases that and whether they're made up or someone said earlier, sort of the green, yellow, orange. I think that was Kaniqua. This company uses that same scale for rating cases, and I want them to bring in some orange cases so that the learners can look at them and say, what's missing? How can we make this a green case? Like, how can we elevate that? And I want the learners to problem solve around that so that they can identify when they're writing a case. Can I say, does this have all the elements in it? And so it's taking one that is, not an ideal example and bringing that up and working on it as a problem. So that's how I see this as being a valuable asset in the learning process.
I'll jump in. I think I think what you're talking about is, again, it's about letting the learners it's basically having them check their background knowledge against what's possible, And I think about this as an instructional designer, because I'm so new and I work at a top 5 institution. Everybody around me kind of knows the material. And I'm like, not only am I learning how to be an instructional designer, I don't know all your acronyms that you guys are using. I don't know the department. You tell me to contact this person, and I'm like, I don't know sometimes, and everyone is super helpful and super supportive. So no one's doing it like to, against me. But the reason why I'm thinking about that now is like, sometimes there needs to be non-examples, right? So if I'm working, I'm thinking about my own elephant. So that's why I'm bringing up my work, right? So I'm not even thinking about the learner. I'm thinking of me as a learner and instructional designer, okay? So just to make it clear. So sometimes when I'm working on something and it's like, please create this learning experience, I'm like, I don't have a non-example though. Like, I don't know what it was before. Like, we're teaching the new thing, but I need to see the counter example. I need to see what didn't work before or what the old system was so that I can even create for the new system. And it's the same thing with our learners, right? That's that friction. It's like, it's there's no friction between saying, hey, here's all the new things. But if you're saying, no, this is exactly what you don't want it to look like, right? Then it's like, oh, I understand even more now what it should look like. And I think sometimes we are afraid of counter examples or non-examples. We're like, we don't want to show them the wrong way at all. And it's like, no, show them the wrong way and the consequences of not adapting to whatever new behavior you're trying to implement. Any other thoughts on that from the panel?
I was gonna maybe think about the not giving too much guidance. I'm working on a course right now to be taught in VR around like game narrative and all this stuff. But I was thinking like how do I first get them into understanding like different genres of video games without doing the telling, you know? And I'm thinking like about having them think of, you know, bad examples of movies or TV shows that they've seen and use that information to start, you know, to engage. And then instead of giving them like, okay, and now let's try and like create genres based on that information that we have. You know, have them mind map their own thing and create their own visual, because that's also a point maybe to exploit for friction. Instead of creating those materials, instead of creating those guides, have them come up with that. It'll save me time of having to create something. And, you know, we waste a lot of time creating visuals that the learner should really be the one to do that, because it's like such a great opportunity for them to do it. And so I think we need to stop, I think, especially if you're in L&D or, you know, instructional design, stop thinking of yourself as someone who creates slides and guides and visuals, because yes, sometimes they're pretty and sometimes they're needed bookmarks, but those are the potential learning points, and you're taking them, you know, as the designer or as the facilitator. Instead, we should be handing it over to the learner.
I love that. Go
Another
ahead.
aspect another aspect of friction is giving them examples and tasks, role plays, scenarios that are just difficult enough, or maybe they're, you know, really problem scenarios that have a lot of friction. You know, how are you going to solve this? And sometimes these are perfect opportunities for teamwork. And then you get teams together and they have to really, you know, brainstorm and think hard. Okay, how are we going to solve this? And so the friction is in the difficult example. And but I also like what you're saying about bad examples, non-examples, because sometimes, you know, if they say, okay, if you do it this way, these are the consequences, and so be aware of that.
Absolutely.
Thanks
I
for
wanted to.
marrying
I'm
that
sorry.
piece to the consequence. Like, I feel like that sort of rounds it out. It's just like, here's a bad example. You can't just leave it there. You have to, you know, take that all the way through. So thanks for bringing that back out.
I wanted to pull out some of the things that I'm seeing in the chat conversation, because quite a few people are talking about, I think it's Sarah and Kristen are talking about mistakes being learning opportunities. And Willette was talking about a pre-test or entry skills test is a good way to assess what they know. But I think also when people get things wrong, that's where that they start to identify that curiosity gap. So on the one hand, it's like we want them to feel confident and things like that. But when we give them opportunities to fail, that is what sparks that, wait, I didn't get that right. Or, you know, let me then really pay attention and remain engaged to figure out the why. So yeah, I think some like really building opportunities for safe failure and mistakes into your learning design is important.
Absolutely. And safe failure, right? Because there is between frustration level and challenging. Like Julie talks about, like if you give somebody, it's not exactly what she said, but if you give somebody 5 minutes for a 20-minute task, they're not going to be too happy, right? But if you give them maybe 18 minutes for a 20-minute task, and that goes back to that immediacy and urgency, but not just time based, right? Because I know you were just talking about time based, but just the content itself, getting to the proficiency level, right? Getting to where you need to be. All right, we can take about one more comment on this from the panel before we go on to the next chapter. All right, I think we're ready to go to the next one. All right, so chapter 7 discussion. All right, so I love this image because I look at this image. I feel called out by Julie all the time. I'm just like, I'm thinking I'm doing a good job, but okay, yes, I'm guilty of this situation, right? So in this image, of course, it's intro, new info, more info, even more info, yet more info, summary, right? And I really love this image because I was like, that's how we do it, right? We only have this a set amount of time we have to get them through. And of course, she proposes that it'd be better to say, all right, some new stuff, pretty easy stuff already, a little bit more stuff maybe a little faster. Like you're gradually kind of putting them up that hill, right? So with those images in mind, what are the barriers that we have in our industry or people's ideas or whatever? You can come at it from any angle to having enough practice. I think all of us will agree that our learners never get enough practice in this field, right? It's that's one thing I'd say is kind of different in K-12. Like sometimes it was truncated, but you kind of drove that a bit more. But we don't, we have clients and other stakeholders too. How do we ensure learners get enough practice even with limitations? Because sometimes we can't, there's nothing we can do about the limitations, right? And what are some unique approaches to feedback you have seen, heard, experienced, or tried? So before we answer this, this is our last discussion, but I do want to say something to the panelists. We're usually words, Nicole. We're usually really good on time, but because we're doing 3 chapters today, we're gonna go into this a little bit more minutes. But if there's any panelist that says, I gotta, I have this thing that was already scheduled and you have to kind of hop off. We totally understand that. We're not going to go too much longer, but I just want to say that out loud so you don't feel this like weird pressure because you guys are all awesome and volunteering your time on a Saturday. All right. Anybody want to jump into any one of these?
I'm going to jump in just because I thought this was so timely. I actually sent my friends and talk about gifts. Like, how are you feeling right now? I sent my friend yesterday before reading this chapter a gif of myself or a little character like riding a bike up a hill, because part of my new work that I'm working on right now is a lot of project management, and that's new to me. And I'm like, oh, everything's so difficult right now. And so I'm like, set myself as this cycling up a hill. And then that evening I'm like reading this chapter and I was like, that's exactly the picture I sent my friend. And also exactly what I'm trying to do with this client right now, because there was like all knowledge, get on the job, and everyone's banging their head against the computer. So I was like, we got to practice. We got to break this out. We got to slow down. We had to take a breath, and we have to get practice in there so that when they get on the job, they can do it. But I'm also getting faced with like, we can't get them into the technology. There's no sort of sandbox for doing that. And this is a limitation that I'm dealing with right now. And it's kind of very present. I've got the next couple of months to figure that out, but it's a significant limitation to getting the learners to practice hands-on what they need to do on the job, because the organization isn't opening up space for that. So that's a challenge that I'm working on.
I love that you brought that challenge up, because sometimes when I'm working on things, I would ask, I was like, oh, is there, I know that it's a sandbox. I'll be like, is there a dummy version of this that we can implement? And usually the answer is no. And if you work at a firm that is large and in charge and they have their own multimedia team, and then you go in this other wing of the office and they have their own developers, you can do that. But when you don't have that, right? How else do we get around it? And it's one of those things where sometimes the answer is not here yet, right? And one of the things I love about this book is, I don't know if you all feel like this, but sometimes as an instructional designer, I'm like, I know this is right. And the book makes me feel like, see, I knew. I'm not wrong. I don't have an answer to how we're going to solve it now, but at least I knew that we're on that. And I'm starting to think about, when it comes to practice, kind of, again, another paradigm shift, right? Does all of our learning have to always be, again, this self-paced module? Like, and again, and this is radical for some people, but, let's say it's a physical sort of labor sort of thing. Can we all go to the place? And this is the time and energy that sometimes our stakeholders don't want, but can we all go to the place and do it? Or even more so, and there's a big push for AI and VR, and that's Lauren's space, right? What are we doing about utilizing this? Because it's not as if this is so far. We're not talking about the Jetsons at this point, right? The Jetsons are here. We are the Jetsons, okay? So at this point, Facebook is now Meta. So again, every time I mention technology, I always want to give this caveat. I am not saying that technology will solve our learning needs. That will always be our responsibility, because you can have the most amazing VR, most amazing thing, and not hit any of these targets. But the reason why I am bringing this up is the larger part that's beyond us, right? Like, I know Aaron doesn't have the ability to say, huh, I have this new VR thing, but I'm just thinking, kind of like when we talked earlier about the shift needing to be that the learner has some ownership and responsibilities, and you need to shift that idea. I'm thinking about that even from a stakeholder perspective, right? We need to start advocating. I mean, it's going to take a while for people to say practice has to look real. And sometimes it's not going to be behind a computer. Sometimes it's not going to be just in a meeting, but we're probably going to have to go to an environment and assess there through observation or whatever. I mean, that's just one example of many, but we're going to have to advocate for what it can look like, is what I'm saying. Not that the technology takes our responsibility for us. Anyone else?
So,
Oh, go ahead.
so when I think about practice and application, the couple of things. When I look at the illustration of the biker going up a hill and then it levels off a little bit and then going up another hill, uh, Dr. M. David Merrill, he talks about using a progression of problems, but he talks about doing the whole problem. Okay, most most people, think, okay, we're going to do part of the task and then the next part. He's saying if you can work at getting them doing the whole problem, start with easy problems and then work up to harder problems. But your point about I say you have to think outside the computer when you get to application, because there are a few things that you can do some serious application online. A lot of things you can't. And so it's like Aaron is saying, if you don't have the sandbox, how do you have them practice? If you don't have a simulation, how do you have them practice? Or maybe they can uh, practice on the job with easier tasks that they'll probably be successful with. I don't know, but the point is, and I gave actually a presentation at the University of Limerick many years ago, and they were asking, well, how do you teach all these skills online? And I say, well, you can provide demonstration online, but even, and now there are more tools, but the point is you need to have practice, best, best practice application. Again, think outside the box and say, how can we have them apply it? Can we have them video themselves doing it? Can we have them doing it and then reporting on it? And so, but the media the media and technology have obscured best practice instructional strategies, and so we have to bring those back in the best practice learning strategies, and make sure we have the core strategies, with whatever technology we use.
I love that.
To build on Dr. Max's point, I think in the book also talks about follow up coaching, and I think that there's sometimes limitation to like keep sending out learning or keep sending out practice activities, but one of the things that we don't talk enough about is like that enabling environment and the people who are going to like follow up with them and coach them and make sure that they're doing it. And I think particularly to Aaron's point, it can be really tough with software simulations if there is no sandbox or there is no opportunity to practice. And this week, one also brought up at my own job that oftentimes a person who's in charge with supervising may not have the same permissions or the same access that the person has, so they can't even really. It's hard. You want to coach and encourage, but you can't like just hop in and demo something for someone or coach around it because you don't have that same, particularly with like financial systems, things like that. You don't have that same access. So that's sort of like no good answer that I have, but I would love to hear like how do people really try to incorporate that social on the job coaching, because I don't think that we do that as much, plan for it as much.
Sorry, I was muted. I really love when you talk about the piece about the accountability piece. And everybody in the chat, by the way, if your chat has stopped on LinkedIn, if you do a quick refresh, it should start right back up. So just wanted to say that out loud. Thank you to my wonderful chat moderators that's letting us know what's going on. But I think, what would it look like? I'm not suggesting this because I don't know. What would it look like? Again, we can't always control if it's implemented, but if a part of our learning was, all right, the next part is, here's the plan for, your supervisors and managers. Like, here's how you follow up with this, right? And then before we come back to part two of the training or whatever, like, what if a part of our learning is a directive to the manager or to the client? So again, I don't know. I'm not saying that that's a magic bullet. I'm not saying people would do it, but what would that look like if that's a piece that we're adding already? Like, because they want to see results anyway, right? And they're not learning experience designers, instructional designers, whatever. So sometimes maybe that guidance would be helpful for them to say, oh, I'm able to measure it on my own as well. So just kind of throwing that out there, but I don't know how that would look practically.
I was going to say too, about the barriers. I think a lot of the times it's, information presentation takes away from the time, the need to like just give a lot of information, as well as the assessments or the types of evaluations that come after practice. I've had, learning experiences where the learners don't buy into practices or simulations or role plays because they see what the assessment is going to be and they're like, I don't need that. So thinking also forward, like if you're going to design something, you want to think backwards, right? Like you want to think backward design and where you're going to have the learners go and what practices are going to take them there. You can design a really amazing assessment and then really make those practices meaningful for the learner. I was also going to say, as a possible solution, projects and problem solving learning. If you have your learners choose a problem or choose a project that's related to the work that they do, then those practice moments are going to be built in inherently. Like they're going to see, oh, I need to be able to do this in order to, finish this project or address this problem. So I thought that might be a kind of way to think about addressing how to get practice, involved in training. And then real quick about VR training. Research it. I think there's a lot of potential out there. I just recently watched this example of someone working in like a warehouse and they were trying to install like a water system. And so the person's in VR, they have all of these tools and they have a little like voice that tells them, here are the parts, grab that part. And so there's a lot of psychomotor learning domain involved there because they pick something up, they put it in because of something called haptics, where they get like an actual sensation in their hand. They can feel what that feels like to place something in there. And they can also get feedback from that too. Can say like, it took you this long, you weren't able to find these things, so maybe you want to look at the table and try and pick those up again and put them in there. Just look into it. I would encourage, because I think in this field, VR training, learning experiences, and that's just one small example, there's so many, are kind of the future of things, and they're not going to overtake everything, no doubt, but they will be involved somehow, I'm sure, in a lot of what we do in the future.
I love that. And thank you for sharing that exact example of VR, because again, the psychomotor skills that you're learning and the sensation in your hand, like, is like, I thought about, just throw the word simulation out there, but that's a more sensory experience, right? Than we're really like talking about. And I love what you talked about. We've been saying a lot about give them a real world problem. And as you're saying that, I'm thinking about, what if the training is literally, I'm not talking about, what if the training is literally maybe an ILT or an OLT? Like, you have this situation at your job, you have to go through all of these scenarios. Here are the answers, and they're branched, right? So it's not like everyone's getting something. And your quiz is really making it through this obstacle, and that's it. It's not like just supplementing the quiz, but that problem is it. And one, it's going to be challenging in a good way, but you're going to be like, oh my gosh, there's no like easy quiz at the end. Like you said, they say, oh, there's an assessment, I don't need it. But if that's what it is,
It's the project, yeah.
right. But
Yeah.
if it's the project, one, it's good learning. Two, they won't forget the experience. They'll be able to apply it on their job. And you're going to guarantee that they get through that training because it's not just answer A or answer B, you know? So I think, man, that has a lot of potential.
So, so just a comment, building on what you've been everybody's been saying, is having them, practice with the real world problems is the way to go. But Kaniqua talked about coaching, and of course, Lauren talked about virtual reality, and for complex tasks, you know, virtual reality could become really critical. But what's interesting is you've probably heard of this 70-20-10 rule or guideline, all right? And 10% is the training event, 20% is the coaching, and 70% are challenging activities and tasks on the job. And it makes so much sense, but we don't do it most. We don't do it most of the time. And I liked what Kanique was and others were saying, and maybe Nicole, you were saying about building in that coaching. Who's going to be the coach, and how guidelines for how they should be coaching, and criteria for performance and feedback. And anyway,
Yeah.
great ideas, great comments.
But Dr. Cropper, even to your point, because we're instructional designers or learning experience designers, so we talk about that a lot. But a lot of people that are in this space are organizational development people, right? So they're developing leaders. They're not just showing a training or two. I mean, so even that, like that piece, it affects the whole workplace culture,
Yeah.
right? So if we start changing that paradigm, people feel like, no, at this job, I'm going to be supported. At this job, my manager was able to coach me after this training, or I was even trusted with some responsibility. I took the training and I was giving a facilitator's guide. Now they tell me to train the new people. So the new people don't have to take this training. Only the people that are going to teach others the training have to take the training. But I'm trusted with this, or there's a stipend for me teaching others what happened in this training. Like there's so much potential for this to enrich our lives. And essentially, one of my professors in my master's program was just like, it's about enhancing human performance. So just the potential, moving forward is just so important. And we have a comment. So Tanya says, um, to Lauren, do you have any recommendations for intro level resources learning how to utilize VR or AR trainings, either for K through 12 or any adults?
Yeah, there's actually, I would say the biggest resource would be communities, because I mean, word of mouth is really how a lot of things get spread. But I would say, like, check out, there's VR, is it VR educators that meet up in a virtual platform? And even if you don't have a VR headset, a lot of the stuff can be accessed from your desktop. But I can put a few resources in the chat later on if anyone's interested in it. But even do a quick search on YouTube, and just if you're curious about what these things look like, I would say, VR trainings, VR learning.
And I think go ahead, Kaniqua.
I was just going to comment quickly what Dr. Cropper was talking about, the 70-20-10 model, and how we so often focus very much on the 10. But if you look at like the 5 moments of learning need, I think if you look from that perspective, it helps you think of like, if these people are like knee deep in the 70, what moment of need are they in? So it's not that you're not designing anything, but that's where it's like, let them pull the things as they need it and put it in their environment versus, this separate thing.
You're muted, Nicole.
I was saying perfect. I love that. Any last thoughts, Aaron or anyone? All right. So I just want to say again, thank you guys so much. This has been my favorite week so far. I just, it could just be the progression of the book too, because it gets deeper and deeper into our work. But I also want to just remind you guys out there that this is a book club, but we also hope that you can operationalize it and build real community. I love when I see people saying, "Hey, good to see you again," and I'm like, "Oh my gosh, you're in a different country or a different state." So please feel free to, there's a networking tab. add and connect with people, connect with any of our co-hosts, our panelists. If somebody said something that resonated with you, or you really trust their thought leadership, we can add, even in the chat, add recommendations or endorse skills on LinkedIn. We want to make sure that this works for everybody to actually elevate all of our profiles. So we're learning, but we also want to help each other get to where we want to and grow. And I just want to thank everyone that's here today that came near, far, and wide. That's the phrase, I guess. I'm going to watch this later and be like, oh my gosh, Nicole. But thank you all for being with us, and have a great one. We're going to see you next week. You want to check my page to see when it's time to register for week 4. All right, everybody. Have a great afternoon.
Thanks, everybody.